Scott just made the point.
Real seems to be a lot more secure, not just.
When a black-shrouded figure with a British accent appeared to use a hunting knife to saw through the neck of photojournalist James Foley in the name of Allah and the new Islamic State, Americans reacted with horror. But the scene is quite familiar to people in the so-called Muslim world. Should the American reaction lead to U.S. military action? I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Stephen Green and Bill Whittle as we start a three-part trifecta series called The Dark State Rises. We'll look at the causes, the strategic counter-options, as well as domestic defense and political implications of the rapid emergence of the Islamic State. Well, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, ISIS, also called ISIL for Islamic State in the Levant, seems to have emerged from nowhere in 2014, first as a terror group, then as an army, and now a self-declared nation-state, geographically the size of Great Britain. It encompasses some 6 million people, controls 40% of Iraq's wheat harvest, huge oil reserves, and a military might sufficient to defeat elements of both the Syrian and Iraqi armies. Somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 fighters earn competitive wages and wield some of the best battlefield weapons that American and Russian tax dollars can buy. The operation gets funded by sales of oil, wheat, and hostages, as well as taxation and the normal flow of cash from Sunni, often Saudi, princelings, promoting the most radical form of Islam. Where al-Qaeda staged bombings to inspire terror and remained a shadowy, decentralized network with a long-term goal of setting up the Caliphate, ISIS uses blitzkrieg to take territory and establishes local governance under Sharia law. Over the weekend, the Islamic State relieved Syria of its last military airbase in its northeastern province. Now, back in January, President Obama seemed dismissive of the ISIS threat. He said the analogy we use around here sometimes, and I think is accurate, is if a JV team puts on the Lakers uniforms, that doesn't make them Kobe Bryant. I think there is a distinction between the capacity and reach of a bin Laden and a network that is actively planning major terrorist plots against the homeland versus jihadists who are engaged in various local power struggles and disputes, often sectarian. But what a difference 7 months can make. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel now says that ISIL is as sophisticated and well-funded as any group that we've seen. They're beyond just a terrorist group. They marry ideology, a sophistication of strategic and tactical military prowess. They are tremendously well-funded. This is beyond anything we've seen, so we must prepare for everything. And the only way you do that is that you take a cold, steely, hard look at it and get ready. Now, Stephen Green, is the emergence of the first caliphate since 1924 a byproduct of U.S. intervention in Iraq and perhaps support of Israel, or merely another manifestation of the medieval death cult called radical Islam?
Well, yes, it's not an either-or. Look, I warned in 2002 or 2003 in a column at Vodka Pundit that if we were going to occupy Iraq, it was going to have to be a 50-year commitment to build a country out of this mishmash of British and French interests with, you know, these artificial lines on the map. So it was going to take 50 years at least. And we gave it 9 years. Now, Bush wasted 2 or 3 of those with Don Rumsfeld and his light footprint strategy. And then we just cut and run with Obama in 2011. So we opened that door for ISIL or for somebody to step through. But the more important issue is, how stupid is our president? Just how dumb is this guy? Look, a terrorist is never more than a single plane ride away from this country. So when you have a group that may be engaged in sectarian violence, well, as long as they have territory, and as long as they have funding, and as long as they have fighters, these guys are never more than a plane ride away from this country, or from our, well, what used to be our southern border with Mexico. He doesn't think they can chew gum and walk at the same time. It's an amazing thing, the depths of ignorance this president has displayed on this issue.
Bill Whittle, does our surprise and alarm at the beheading of an American represent just our deeply moral core values? Or is it a symptom of our geostrategic naivete that it took us so long to wake up and smell the caliphate?
You got a lot of stuff packed into that one question, Scott. First of all, when you say, does it surprise us? I think it surprises a lot of Americans who may not have been exposed to this before, but people like you two guys and most of our viewers here at PJTV have been watching this go on forever. We saw it happen to Daniel Pearl, and we watched it basically happen in all of the intervening years. I don't want to say that every time you hear somebody shout Allahu Akbar, somebody's having their head sawed off, but every time somebody's having their head sawed off, somebody's shouting Allahu Akbar. And that's been going on nonstop. So it's not a surprise to me the depth of depravity of these people. I think what's interesting about ISIS, though, Scotty, as you pointed out with the map that we saw earlier, is that unlike al-Qaeda, who seemed to be, and not only seemed to be, was intentionally an enormously dispersed, geographically unrooted terrorist organization that struck U.S. interests, what these guys are trying is they're trying territory. And this map, while interesting, is not nearly as interesting as a larger map, which I've occasionally seen online, because the larger map outlines what ISIS thinks they own, what they think is theirs, what the Caliphate thinks is theirs. It's a policy of Islam, it's in the Quran, that once the flag of Islam has flown over a territory, that territory is Muslim and will be for the rest of time. So in the much larger map that's out there, you can see that Spain, all of it, Spain is part of Islam. It's part of the Caliphate. And most of southern Europe is. They stopped the Islamic conquest at the gates of Vienna. Charles Martel stopped them at the gates of Vienna, Austria. Everywhere that they once were, all of Africa, most of the Middle East, they claim as theirs. And they're not fooling around either. They want it back. To call them the junior varsity team is I think, Barack Obama's mission accomplished moment. And to be fair to George Bush, by the way, this just has to be said, the mission accomplished moment that was so used to bludgeon George Bush when he stood on the deck of the, I think it was the Abraham Lincoln, after the Kinetic War in Iraq had ended, and everybody said, oh, he's mission accomplished. That banner was printed up by the Navy people on board that ship for the ship that was returning from its deployment. George Bush wasn't saying mission accomplished in Iraq, but he was made to say that. We won't hear anything about Obama's junior varsity comments in the future. They'll go down the same memory hole as every other error this guy made. But I'll just close by saying this. We are seeing now in the Ukraine, where Russian troops and tanks have entered the Ukrainian border, throughout Syria and throughout the Middle East, we are now beginning to see what the world looks like without American power. Because although the American military is still in place, the will to use it is clearly not. And as this force field of protection collapses throughout the world in the next 2 years, I think we're going to look back on these days and think, man, were those ever rosy and calm back at the beginning of the power vacuum of the loss of American force and power in the world.
Well, it would be easy to blame Barack Obama, George Bush, and several other U.S. presidents for the mess in the Middle East that has given rise to the savage new caliphate. But this would be as naive as Secretary of State John Kerry, who apparently thinks the Shia and Sunni are going to sit down and work out their centuries-old differences through dialogue and then perhaps share the love with the Jews. The United States didn't make the Middle East a hell on earth. The local folks did that. What's disturbing is Barack Obama's rapid evolution on the Islamic State since January of this year. It leaves us with one of three potential scenarios. The President of the United States, surrounded by the best intelligence resources on earth, either one, didn't see the Islamic State coming, or two, saw it coming and didn't act to protect American interests and allies, or three, saw it coming but didn't mind. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.